Okay, welcome to the webinar titled A Summary of the Results of the 2016 Billion Ton Report, Advancing Domestic Resources for a Thriving Bioeconomy. This webinar will provide an overview of the first volume of the 2016 Billion Ton Report, which was recently released at the Bioenergy 2016 conference last week. Volume 2 of this report, which will focus on the environmental effects of select scenarios of Volume 1, will be released by the end of 2016, so mark your calendars. As a quick intro, my name is Mark Ellis and I'm a technology manager here at the Department of Energy. I'm here today with my friends and colleagues who have helped write, review, assemble, and release this report. First is Dr. Matthew Langholtz, who is a senior research scientist at Oak Ridge National Lab. Second is Mr. Lawrence Eaton, who is a research economist at Oak Ridge. Third is Mr. Aaron Myers, who is a principal investigator of the Bioenergy Knowledge Discovery Framework, or KDF. And fourth is Dr. Bryce Stokes, who is senior advisor to the Department of Energy at Allegheny Science and Technology. As a quick reminder, everyone is muted through the GoToWebinar, but please raise your hand or use the chat function if you have any questions or issues during the webinar. So let's begin. I'll first kick off with some details surrounding the Bioenergy Technologies Offices, or BETO, mission and organization. Then Bryce will dive into the overall history of the Billion Ton reports. Lawrence and Matt will then present key findings from the 2016 Billion Ton report, followed by Aaron, who will present some of the interactive visualizations that you can try on the Bioenergy KDF, or again, Knowledge Discovery Framework. And then we will conclude. As a quick reminder, please record any questions or comments that you may have during the webinar and send them either using the chat function located in the gray bar within the GoToWebinar, or you can email them to us at eere_bioenergy@ee.doe.gov. We'll collect your questions today and provide responses as soon as we can. Slides from the webinar will also be posted online at the link you see here. If any general questions come up regarding the Bioenergy Technologies Office, please feel free to email us as well. I would also like to remind everyone that today's webinar is part of the Bioenergy Technologies Office's ongoing webinar series. Our webinars cover many of the office's activities and feature hot topics discussions that are relevant to the development of renewable fuels, power, and products from biomass resources. More information can be found on our website as shown here. So let's dive right into it. The mission of the BETO office is to develop and demonstrate transformative and revolutionary bioenergy technologies for a sustainable nation. This was just updated in our multi-year program plan, which you can actually get online at energy.gov. BETO consists of the following 5 sub-programs. First, the feedstock supply and logistics, which is focused on biomass resource potential such as described in the Billion Ton 2016 report. Second is the advanced algal systems, which is focused on reducing costs and increased productivity of algal systems. Third is conversion, which is focused on the deconstruction of feedstocks via biochemical or thermochemical routes. Fourth is the demonstration of market transformation program, which is focused on large-scale deployment of integrated biorefineries. And 5, the analysis and sustainability, which is focused on meeting BETO's office and environmental goals. I want to bring your focus to the impacts box. This shows what 1 billion tons of biomass could do and fits right into the reason why we're all here today, to talk about the Billion Ton report, which proves that this could be an attainable goal. The benefits of 1 billion tons of biomass include: 1, reducing oil imports by producing up to 60 billion gallons of biofuels, which would displace 30% of U.S. petroleum consumption. Replace petrol-derived chemicals and products with 50 billion pounds of bio-based chemicals and products. Third, generate 92 billion kilowatt hours that could power 8 million homes. And fourth, reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 500 million tons per year. Before diving into the billion-ton results, I want to emphasize the work of the feedstock supply and logistics team, because it all really starts with the feedstock. The FSL team is particularly focused on optimizing the cost, quality, and quantity of biomass feedstocks, and doing so in a responsible and sustainable manner. We expect that by reducing risk associated with the cost, quality, and quantity of biomass, that we can help enable industry expansion. To do so, we use a combination of basic and applied science, work with relevant stakeholders and partners, and meet our environmental performance goals while assuring sustainability. We have a national scope, but realize that local site-specific conditions must be solved as well. In summary, to realize a commercial advanced biofuels industry, we need a significant sustainable supply of biomass. The Department of Energy is focused on analyzing the resource potential of biomass to understand the feedstock supply for the bioeconomy of the future. The 2016 billion-ton report that we will discuss now is our latest attempt at understanding the potential magnitude of this feedstock supply. Before turning over the presentation to Bryce, I would like to state the three main goals of the 2016 billion-ton report. First, to assess the current demand of commercial biomass to energy feedstocks. Second, to grasp the potential supply to 2040, including biomass from agricultural, forestry, algal, and waste resources, as well as current uses. And third, to start analyzing the environmental sustainability of potential supply, which is covered in Volume 2. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bryce for the summary and history of the 3 billion-ton reports.
Good afternoon. My name is Bryce Stokes, and I am a contractor with DOE, but also I worked on all 3 of the reports, mostly in the forestry component. What we have here is a representation of the 3 reports from the 3 covers. And people think that when we started the report, an analysis back in 2003, we were looking for a billion tons. What we were really trying to do was determine what the available amount of biomass was in the United States. It was a strategic assessment, basically just how much nationally in different types of feedstocks. What we did do was try to determine if we had enough biomass to meet 30% of the current petroleum consumption back then. This was a goal of the Biomass Board Advisory Committee. They were writing a report and they wanted to see if we could displace that much. The first report was followed up in 2011 by a new, complete, more detailed analysis. In 2011, we actually added the economic analysis, not just how much biomass we had, but how much biomass could be collected, harvested for different cost amounts on cost curves. We also did a spatial analysis to see where the biomass was located. So there was a big improvement between 2005 and 2011. And the reason that there was a lot of differences is we had a lot of input on the 2005 publication. People provided us opinions as well as questions, wanting more clarity and wanted a different analysis. And so we tried to add all of this different improvements because of those requests from the stakeholders and users. The difference primarily is in this economics, in which we generated those supply curves as cost to roadside or farm gate. We only looked at taking it off the field or out of the woods to the roadside. We also added energy crops and more detailed energy crop analysis in 2011. Now, 2016 is fairly the same principles of being both a resource assessment as well as an economic analysis. Again, we're generating supply curves for cost of material to roadside. But in addition, you'll hear today about the calculation of cost of biomass to the throat of the biorefinery, something that was added and improved. You'll also see that we added energy crops and algae. We continued with the spatial analysis and able to determine how much biomass is estimated in each county at that level of spatial scale. So with that said, there's a couple of things probably ought to say about today's presentations. In our analysis, in all three of the reports, we exclude the policy and end use. We only look at the biomass supply. We also, in our analysis, we determine and meet the demands for food, forage, feed, and fiber before we start estimating the availability of biomass and the availability of land for biomass. We also look at using conservative estimates and incorporating environmentally sustainable approaches and estimates. So you'll hear all about this in the new volume 2016. So with that, I'll turn the program over to Lawrence.
So the webinar agenda, what we're going to do is go through current uses, jump into the resource assessment, the contributors and all the chapters, and then I'm going to hand over the reins to Matt to talk about it. Deliver supply analysis and implications of the report. So this graph of biomass use is aggregated from EIA data showing biomass as the largest source of renewable energy in the U.S. 10% of our energy consumption is from renewables, and about half of that is coming from biomass. So since 2003, biomass has been the dominant source of renewable energy. So how is it used in our economy? Well, 1 million ton a day is used in the aggregate in the transportation, industrial, and electric generation sector, as well as the residential sector for home heating. About a third of it is going to transportation, with corn grain and fats, oils, and greases being those feedstocks, biomass for feedstock, and wood waste is the largest actual feedstock category going to multiple end-use sectors. So why engage in this study? Well, we've provided a background here for previous reports showing the enormous U.S. domestic potential, up to 1 billion ton annual supply. And understanding, quantifying this biomass supply is critical for our 3 domestic policy goals of security, independence, environmental stewardship with respect to our energy consumption. However, the sustainable production is critical to long-term viability of this technology for clean energy expansion. Our contributors, much like the analysis, are scattered across the entire U.S., and this could not have been done without significant heavy lifts through multiple agencies and departments, institutions. A couple of note, USDA Forest Service providing a heavy lift on forestry analysis, as well as NC State and University of Tennessee, and also the Sun Grant Regional Feedstock Partnership Initiative, which provided the ground truthing for our estimates through of energy crop yield through a network of replicated trials of novel perennial and annual energy crops. So the report generally follows this schematic of biomass supply, thinking about the stages in 3 parts: production, harvest, and delivery and pre-processing. These 3 stages don't apply to every feedstock, but most. For example, energy crops production involve identification of land for energy crops, selection of best local varieties. Harvesting for forestry feedstocks would involve felling, chipping, and moving to a forest landing. Delivery and pre-processing involves loading and unloading of trucks and actual transportation across the road network. Waste resources, however, don't really fit into these categories, but they involve a collection and acquisition cost. So each of these stages involves the use of a large-scale assessment model. We use many of them, such as the Polysys model for agricultural resources, Foreseam for forestry resources. And these can be explored in more detail in chapters 4, 3, 4, and 5 in the report. This word cloud provides the relative scale, the volumes of biomass estimated in the base case scenario in 2040 at $60 per dry ton. So $60 is a reference price. The data provided in the KDF spans the total supply curve in many years and many scenarios. But this shows you that really the perennial grasses and annual crop residues emerge as leaders in volumes of biomass in 2040. But equally important are forestry and waste feedstocks, providing robustness to the overall supply and greater spatial distribution, which we'll get into in a moment. So the biomass potential in 2040 of 826 million tons above existing uses is shown in this map. It shows continuous participation of all counties in the lower 48. And one item to note, which Matt will explain in more detail, is the color scheme here. 100 dry tons per square mile of biomass density corresponds to the same density needed to satisfy a large biomass handling facility used in many techno-economic analyses in the Bioenergy Technology Office. So this map just shows you everything in the color blue provides a substantial volume of feedstock, of biomass feedstock potentially in our 2040 base case. But the full feedstock supplies are available for each individual feedstock as opposed to cumulative year, price, county, and scenario combination. And for each of these resources that has a purple computer monitor that basically shows you a way you can interact directly with visualizations in the report as presented in this presentation. So the interactive resources provided, and this is new in the BT16, different than previous analyses, is full functionality, full interactivity of the data sets, the graphs, the figures, the charts throughout the report are all available on this landing page, which is categorized by chapter. And the map on the right just shows you one example of a potential supply distribution resulting from the analysis in the report. So in general, the 2030 results from the previous billion-ton update in 2011 and the 2040 results of the BT16 are remarkably similar. But if you're comparing apples to apples, which would be 2030 in the BT2 and the 2035 in the BT16, a 20-year simulation, they're only off by 20,000 tons. So the differences actually are calculated in some of the categories that are currently used and energy crops, but generally forestry feedstocks remain on track with the two assessments. And what this shows you is a comparison of the base case from the BT16 and the high yield in relation to the previous analyses of the 2011 billion-ton report, demonstrating economic potential of just over 1 to about 1.5 billion tons per year in the future. So digging into the individual resource assessments from the chapters of forestry, agricultural, waste, and algal resources. As I stated before, the sustainability of these supplies is critical to their viability and viability of the technology using them. Along with satisfying traditional demand, a number of criteria are applied which constrain the forest resource potential to prevent negative environmental impacts. And these include a number, for example, site-specific removal rates according to site conditions, exclusion of sensitive and wet areas, and no production in roadless areas. Overarching all of this is the exclusion of protected areas altogether. This national map shows you the distribution of those resources in 2040 at the reference price of $60, showing a participation in the southeast, the west, as well as the northeast. Sustainable production criteria are applied at many levels in the agricultural assessment, ranging from residue retention, land exclusion for energy crops, and exclusion of irrigated acres, and irrigation altogether for energy crop production. Others are noted here as well as in Chapter 4 and the appendix. The national distribution of agricultural resources is very, very broad, and the largest contributing areas are the Corn Belt and the Plains, as well as the Southeast. The largest growth in individual biomass category is energy crops, which exhibit significant potential across most regions in this map. Waste resources are unique in that they do provide the widest coverage and high concentration in urban areas. These waste categories include a number of streams that can be diverted from landfills, as well as additional waste from many types of sources that are potential candidates for conversion to energy and products. For the first time ever, a national microalgal resource is conducted and provided in this assessment. It's a multiple scenario national cost and supply assessment involving multiple CO2 facilities, co-location with those CO2 facilities, culture, media, and productivity estimates. It is a seminal assessment providing the first of its kind. And now I'm going to hand the reins over to Matt. We'll dig into a little bit more of these potential supplies as well as the implications.
Thanks. This is Matt Langholtz, also at Oak Ridge National Lab. So I'll go into a little more detail of our results and kind of walk through a national scenario where these different resources could potentially build up to a billion-ton vision over time. So first, I'll be looking at the farm gate supplies, and then a little later, I will look at how a subset of these potential farm gate and roadside resources look in terms of economic availability of delivered supplies. So let's start out with this 365 million tons of currently used resources that were identified earlier. So these currently used resources are largely comprised of wood resources for thermal and power applications, and also largely comprised of corn grain for conventional ethanol. So that's about 365 million tons presently, and we just assume that current use to be flat going forward into the future. Of course, those currently used resources are available at whatever their current market prices are. So now let's take a look at the potential additional feedstocks, potential additional cellulosic biomass feedstocks beyond the current uses. So the first category that I'll add is waste resources. So there are about 140 million tons of potentially available waste resources at $60 a dry ton. So here's a summary table of just those waste resources in 2017 and 2040. Of course, you have the intervening years or main intervening years in the graph between them. The waste resources is our most diverse category, largely comprised of construction and demolition debris waste and plastics, paper, and paperboard that are landfilled, as well as a wide variety of other waste resources. So now let's look at our forest, our potentially available forest land resources at $60 in the base case scenario, adding about another 100 million tons. Those forest resources largely comprised of small diameter whole trees, forest residues, and forest thinnings. So different forest land resources there that contribute about another 100 million tons in the near term, as well as going out into the future. And now let's add our agricultural residues. Agricultural residues add approximately another 100, increasing to approaching 200 million tons in the long term. And some detail about the composition of our ag residue resources, largely comprised of corn stover, both in the present and moving forward. So I think something that I think is important to point out is that these three categories: wastes, forest resources, and resources from agricultural residues, represent a near-term supply. So these are feedstocks that are available. They're in the field today, or they're available as waste today, or they're growing today, or they're in the forest today. These resources are available this year. They comprise about 400 million tons, and they could more than double our currently used resources. So now let's add to those resources the potential for energy crops. So energy crop production is, at least on a national level, is low today, but we identify potential in the base case scenario at $60 by 2040, over 400 million tons of potential production of energy crops in the long term. And those energy crops are largely comprised of our perennial grasses, switchgrass, and miscanthus. So by adding the energy crops, adding the 400 million tons of energy crops, the total long-term potential goes to about 1.2 billion tons, or approximately 3 times our currently used resources. And energy crops are clearly needed to realize a billion-ton vision. So I'll briefly point out, looking forward to Volume 2, evaluating environmental sustainability effects of select scenarios from Volume 1. Circled in red are 2 of the 3 select scenarios from Volume 1 that will be evaluated in Volume 2. So more on that a little bit later. So there's the near-term scenario, the long-term base case scenario, and in a moment we'll see the long-term high-yield scenario. But if we look at the high yield potential for energy crops, so here's the green adding the high yield scenario, or assuming 3% annual growth improvements in our energy crops. Energy crops alone can add another more than 700 million tons by 2040 in this analysis. And that high yield scenario brings the total to about 1.5 billion tons, more than 4 times our currently used resources. We should mention a word about our energy crops. We look at this mix in the high yield scenario, again largely comprised of these perennial grasses. This mix of energy crops, that's based on our current best understanding of basically yield and costs of these different energy crops, and any innovations in the future or any gains that one crop makes over another will change this mix in the future. So this isn't a prediction of what we're going to have. It's just an example of a scenario of the potential of energy crops in the future. And also, farmers are going to grow, producers are going to produce whatever the market calls for. So this isn't what's going to happen. This is just a potential scenario. So we just looked at potential supplies at up to $60. By the way, so here's the third of the 3 scenarios going from Volume 1 into Volume 2, the long-term 2040 high-yield scenario. More on that in a little bit. But I was saying, so this is an example of resources potentially available at $60 at the roadside. And just to acknowledge, just to kind of emphasize in this report, of course, at $60, not all the feedstocks necessarily cost $60. And just here's a representation of near-term, 2017, 2022, 2030, 2040, and the mix of different feedstock types, broadly speaking, in a long-term potential supply, a near-term potential supply, different feedstocks potentially available at different prices. The more you offer, the more you get, and a long-term supply. And just to point out how a strategy for potential would be a different than a strategy realizing hopefully potentially a billion-ton plus supply, including these energy crops, and hopefully this could inform strategies of how to start in the near term and get us to the long term. And again, the interactive visualizations that are in the PDF of the report itself, in the hard copy of the report, and in this presentation, and we'll see these right after I hand it over to the next presenter. So of course, we just kind of saw a national roll-up, and these results are available at the county level by price, year, and yield scenario. So here's an example representation of the near-term potential that we just looked at based on those wastes, forest land resources, and agricultural residues. So you can kind of see the spatial distribution of that. And as was mentioned, the blue is 800,000 tons divided by pi times 50 miles squared. So that gives you about 100 tons per square mile needed to support an 800,000 ton per year biorefinery. So the blue indicates areas where we believe there's at least collectively adequate concentrations to support a large-scale biorefinery. Of course, that's not the last litmus test, but that's one indication. So, and here's the long-term supply. When you add the energy crops, you see the growth potential of energy crops heavily in the plain states and elsewhere where energy crops have competitive advantages. So that was the farm gate supply. And the key advancement of this report is advancing to the delivered supply. So we definitely got a lot of feedback after the BT2 in 2011, pointing out the difference between feedstock availability before and after transportation cost. So there were concerns raised about potentially stranded resources or probably economically stranded resources. So in this analysis, we do a case study of potential delivered supplies, and we couldn't do all of the different supplies. We couldn't do all the different resources that you see here, the 38 different feedstocks. We didn't try to do all of them, but rather we picked the 12 major feedstocks that align with conversion pathways, development of which are led by Idaho National Lab. So this subset of these 12 major crops comprise between 70 in the near term, up to 80%, 87% in the long term of the total supply. So we get most of the supply with this subset of important resources. So now let's look at these three scenarios that were analyzed in the scenario analysis of the delivered supplies. So we looked at 2022, which I'll call the near term, the 2040 base case, which I'll call the long-term base, and the 2040 high yield scenario, which I'll call the long-term high yield scenario. So as an example, this is probably an oversimplification and would warrant a webinar in and of itself, but so here is a supply curve of approximately 300 million tons of roadside supply, 22. So here's the near-term scenario, a little over 300 million tons supplies as a function of price in the near term. And basically, we take those county-level feedstocks and we allocate them to, on a grid, on a 50-mile grid, we allocate them to a grid of over 1,300 hypothetical biorefinery locations. So we're not trying to see exactly where things will go. We're just trying to characterize what a least cost mix looks like delivered. So there's the roadside supply. And when we allocate these feedstocks, basically when we apply transportation costs by simulating delivery over a roads network, the solid line on the left, that's your marginal cost curve. So the cost for an additional ton as you increase supply. And what's probably the relevant metric is this dotted line which is the average delivered price at the biorefinery. So at a target cost of $84 or less, in this analysis, this red circle, it's a little over 200 million tons out of those 300 million tons at roadside that are delivered at $84 or less. So in this case, we lose some of that roadside supply due to losses and dry matter losses and overcontracting. So that's the near-term scenario. Let's look at the long-term base case where we have about 700 million tons of roadside supply. We run our transportation analysis and we find that about 500 million tons out of the 700 million tons is potentially available on average at the biorefinery delivered at a target price of $84 or less. Now let's add the long-term high yield scenario, approximately 1 billion tons of potential supply at the roadside at our transportation costs, and we're looking at over 800 million tons out of that 1 billion tons potentially available at the roadside. So if we drop away some of the noise and just focus on the average delivered cost curves, we're looking at about 200 million tons, almost 500 million tons, and over 800 million tons of additional biomass feedstocks delivered at $84 or less under the near-term, long-term base case, and long-term high-yield scenarios, respectively. And if we add back the 365 million tons of currently used resources, add upwards of 100 million tons from those other, I think, 24 or so categories that weren't included in this transportation analysis, if we add back, say, 50 million tons of algae potential supply identified in the report through algae through co-location strategies, you get over 1 billion tons or 1.5 billion tons in 2040 in the base case and the high yield scenarios, respectively. So I should emphasize that this delivered analysis is just engineering costs, does not include return on investment, does not include business costs. Clearly, there are both opportunities and challenges to realizing these potential delivered supplies. And this is not the last word on delivery analysis, but hopefully this is a step forward from the previous reports which stopped at the farm gate or the forest roadside. So clearly there's a great potential delivered supply as well as farm gate supply for biomass utilization. So a quick look at our delivered costs available at the county level. This green indicates where we have supplies on average available at $84 or less delivered, which we just point out, I haven't done any spatial statistics or anything like that, but it just largely correlates where we have high concentrations of farm gate and roadside supplies. So a word about what we mean by potential. I think it's useful to try to understand really what we mean when we say potential, because we emphasize that these are potential supplies and there are different sorts of potential things. So of course there are resources beyond what we look at in this analysis, but the 2005 study was a conservative assessment of the technical potential of biomass resources nationally, and the 2011 and this new 2016 billion ton studies, they're both assessments of the economic availability of biomass resources because they include prices and supply curves. Of course, what the market capture of this is some subset of that economic potential. And I think it's constructive to hopefully think about how we can realize that market potential and how our results can be used within the context of trying to identify that. So for example, in our analysis, we use different yield scenarios. So I apologize, I missed some column headings here, but these are years. So this is the progression of supply over time, where increased yields increase economic availability. So anything on crop improvement or advanced logistics or precision agriculture that can increase the supply of biomass and or decrease the cost of biomass essentially shifts our supply curves to the right and increases the economic availability of biomass. And then of course we introduce these prices, kind of simulating markets, So the more the market can pay for and the more the market can absorb also drives how much the market can capture. So we're kind of, a way of looking at this is we're towards the upper left with not a lot of production and not a lot of market. If we want to get down to the lower right towards the billion ton vision, we need some mix of supply push and market pull. Anything on the market pull side that can, like on the conversion side or co-products, that we can increase the amount the market can buy or the amount the market can pay, can lead us from where we are to where we want to go. A word about Volume 2. Volume 2, coming out later this year, will be an evaluation of environmental sustainability effects of the 3 select scenarios that we looked at from Volume 1. So into Volume 2 are going these 3 scenarios of about 200 million tons, 700 million tons, and over 1 billion tons of potential supply under a near-term, long-term base, and long-term high-yield scenario. And Volume 2 will look at, in the yellow, these 14 key indicators out of these 6 indicator categories. These are being quantified, and this analysis is in progress and into an next review stage today. So you can look for that later this year. So in summary, at roadside, there's 900 million to 1.2 billion tons of potential additional supplies above current uses. Adding current uses brings the total supply in 2040 to about 1.2 to 1.6 billion tons. So clearly we continue to identify a huge potential supply. And probably to emphasize, market capture will be a function of supply and demand interactions, and that's not new to anyone. It's just important for us to acknowledge and keep this in mind as we move forward in an effort to realize a large bioeconomy vision. So it's our hope that that the conversation will start to shift from how much is available to how we can make this happen. And to that end, it's our hope that the BT16 results will be put to work by the broader biomass community. So to that end, much of what we have presented today is available, and more is available in our interactive online resources. And with that, I will hand it to Aaron Myers with the Bioenergy KDF to review and demonstrate some of those resources where you can access our results.
All right, thanks, Matt. So this is just the homepage of the Bioenergy KDF, and if you'll see on the right-hand side, we have a big block that says 2016 billion ton report. So to get to all the interactive visualizations, you can simply click that box, and it's going to take you to our overview page. And basically, there's a lot going on here, summarizing a lot of aspects of the report. So you can get through some key aspects. You can access the report itself. You can get to the Data Explorer tool or the Data Download tool. Or if you're looking to dive deeper into a specific chapter, you can drill down into one of the specific chapters broken up themselves. You'll notice that in the top left corner of each chapter, there's a little download icon. You can actually download just that specific chapter broken out from the report if you're looking to really get some insight into what's some of the assumptions and the analysis that went on pertaining to that chapter. And I will note that in Chapter 1, the Executive Summary Overview includes the Executive Summary, Chapter 1, and Chapter 8, some of the conclusions. So we rolled that up into one overarching piece of content. Finally, something to notice, if you scroll down to the bottom of this landing page, in the footer, you'll see a lot of additional really useful information. Again, quick links to other things that are in the KDF. But we also have some predefined maps that you could download and use in presentations and to explore the billion ton report more. We also have already combined several sets of data for you. You can download the entire billion ton 2016 data set in a convenient zip file. They'll have citations and disclaimer information. And you can get to all of that simply by going to the footer of the page. Also, as we find changes for the report, we have a report information page that I'll keep you up to date on any known issues or updates pertaining to the report. And you can contact the Billion Ton researchers via the KDF as well. So to get started, I'm going to dive into Chapter 1. Each of the chapters are laid out in a very similar fashion. So kind of understanding how this works will help you navigate the rest of the chapters. At the top, you'll find some text outlining what pertains in that chapter. And then you'll see a list. These numbers represent different visualizations, different ways of accessing and understanding the data. And as you hover over each one, it'll give you a little bit of a hint of what you're going to find under each of these different visualizations. So we're going to start with our executive summary table. So you can interact with this by changing the price. So if you're interested in $80 or want to look at a higher yield scenario, say 2%. And as you make those changes, the table is actually updating to show you the total biomass that's being produced. So at that particular combination, you're getting about 1.6 billion tons of biomass. You can also change the forestry as well. Just to kind of reiterate that point, if you drop your price down to only $40 per dry ton, you'll get a value of only about 765 million tons of biomass. So you can really start to play with the different scenario and price combinations to summarize the data in a unique way. We'll jump into a different visualization, one that's a little more interactive, has a mapping component to it. So in this map, on the left-hand side, you can again start to reflect, you can adjust the years and price combinations. You can change the scenarios. And you can also, if you're not interested in just data density, you can actually look at annual production per dry ton. This bar at the top is a unique capability that'll actually sum up all of the potential supply resources for your current selection. So if you want to subset to just a particular region of the U.S., you can do that, and you can see that the bar will update. Or you can actually click and filter down to just the agricultural data as well. From here, most of the visualizations have a download capability. Should have a download capability. That will take you to allow you to actually download the data for the visualization that you're currently looking at. And this actually takes you over to our Billion Ton download tool, where you can get CSV data dumps of the Billion Ton report. So to run through this pretty quick, at the top you'll notice it'll tell you, based on your current selection, how many rows you're going to get, about how long it will take, and then a button to actually generate the file. If we scroll down a little bit, you'll see the actual data, and then along the left-hand side there are facets to which you could further refine your results. So if I was just interested in Georgia, I could filter my results down to just Georgia and get that data. And so see, now we're down to just 4,000 rows. It'll take about 8 seconds to download. You'll also notice that the map updates to show you where your data is actually available. So it's filtered it down to just Florida. Now we'll jump over to the Data Explorer tool real quick. Oops, sorry, get to the right page. Click on Data Explorer. This will take you to the larger KDF map.
I might have too much open.
So basically with this wizard, and for some reason the map's not displaying, technical difficulties, problems with the live demos. Basically by changing the, oh, there we go. So you can slide this modal window out of the way, and I apologize that the screen resolution is so small. You can use these drop downs to change your scenarios, look at different result types, and aggregate the data in different ways. As you make these changes, the map will dynamically update to reflect those changes quickly, and you can then kind of explore that with other related bioenergy data that's on the KDF. If you have any questions, there is a contact us link in the header of the KDF, and you can send questions specific to the Billion Ton 16 team, or you can send it more general questions about how the KDF functions will be passed along to the KDF development team to resolve any issues that you're experiencing trying to use these reports and these capabilities. So that's all I've got. Thank you.
Back to you, Mark, I believe, for wrap up. Are you on mute, Mark?
Oh, sorry, I believe I was. I was talking to myself. Sorry, I'll do that again. Thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned before, these slides will be made available on the Bioenergy Technologies Office website. Please direct any questions to EERE_bioenergy at ee.doe.gov. We ask that you please include Billion Ton Report Webinar in the subject line of your email. This time, I'd like to thank all of our attendees for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you again.
And as a reminder, the slides from this presentation will be posted online, as well as the recording at www.energy.gov/EERE/bioenergy/webinars. And if you have questions, do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you.